A millionaire woman discovers her lost daughter working as a waitress because of a necklace the young woman was wearing. Grace Villaseñor never thought she would set foot in Guadalajara again. For 20 years, she had avoided the city as if she were running from a nightmare, as if the simple act of walking through its streets could reopen a wound that had never healed. But there she was, sitting in the first class of her private jet, watching out the window as the city approached. The sky was turning orange with the sunset, and the city lights were beginning to shine like small stars on the horizon. She couldn't say exactly what had brought her back. It wasn't a business appointment, it wasn't a social event. It was something deeper, more instinctive, a silent call that pulled her back to that place of painful memories, as if something there was still waiting for her. Upon landing, Grace stepped off the plane with firm steps, but inside she felt restless. The driver was already waiting for her on the road, a uniformed man who respectfully opened the car door. "Welcome to Guadalajara, Mrs. Villaseñor," he said, but Grace didn't answer right away. She just took a deep breath and got into the vehicle, smelling the familiar scent of wet earth mixed with the city's heat. As the car drove through the streets, she watched through the window at the changes that had occurred since her last visit. New buildings, sophisticated shops, and also the old street markets, the vibrant colors of the food stalls, and the unfamiliar faces that hurried past on the sidewalks. Grace's heart was racing. Why was she here? What did she expect to find? She closed her eyes for a moment and let her mind travel to that night. The last night she saw her daughter, Gabriela. The car stopped at a red light, and Grace realized that her breathing was heavy. Her fingers lightly tightened the hem of her silk skirt. Something was about to happen. She could feel it. She was back. And this time, she wasn't leaving Guadalajara without answers. The luxurious black car pulled up discreetly on a busy street in downtown Guadalajara. Grace Villaseñor looked around, feeling out of place between the simplicity of the place and her own imposing presence. She could have chosen a fancy restaurant, a place that befitted her wealth and status, but for some inexplicable reason, her eyes were drawn to a small taqueria on the corner. The dim yellow lights illuminated the modest space, where the smell of roast meat and freshly made tortillas hung in the air. The hum of animated conversation, the clink of silverware, and the soft Latin music playing in the background created a welcoming atmosphere for anyone but Grace. She hesitated for a moment before pushing open the glass door, feeling the discreet glances of a few customers who noticed her presence. The heels of her shoes echoed softly on the worn tile floor as she walked to a table in the corner. The waiter, a middle-aged man in a sauce-stained apron, approached with a notepad in his hand. "Good evening, Senora. What would you like?" Grace looked at the laminated menu on the table, but the words seemed jumbled. She wasn't there for the food, but at that moment she needed something to anchor her to reality. "Bring whatever is most requested here," she replied without much emotion. The waiter nodded and hurried away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Grace ran her fingers over the table, feeling the slightly rough texture of the wood. The smell of the spices brought her a bittersweet sense of nostalgia. 20 years ago, Gabriela had loved tacos. She still remembered her daughter's laugh, the way she held the food in her small hands, and the way her smile could light up any room. A silent pain pierced her chest. She picked up her cell phone and looked at the screen, but there were no messages that mattered. Nothing there could fill the emptiness that followed her, like a shadow. She sighed and placed the device on the table. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with a plate of juicy tacos, topped with onion, cilantro, and a touch of lime. "Which sauce do you prefer? There's mild, medium, and spicy." Grace looked at the colorful jars in front of her. For a moment, she felt like a stranger in her own land. She chose a sauce at random and, not very hungry, picked up a taco and took the first bite. The flavor was strong, full of memories. She chewed slowly, as if the simple act of eating could bring back something she had lost. But deep down, she knew that nothing in that place could fill the absence that had consumed her for 20 years. Grace chewed slowly, trying to concentrate on the taste of the food, but her mind was far away. The emptiness that had been with her for 20 years seemed even stronger there, in a place that didn't bring back good memories. It was then that something caught her attention. A young waitress was moving around the small restaurant, skillfully balancing a tray. The atmosphere was modest, and she seemed to be part of it, greeting customers with a discreet smile. But Grace didn't see any of that. Her gaze was fixed on a specific detail, a golden medallion hanging around the girl's neck. The world around Grace seemed to disappear. Her heart began to beat faster, and a chill ran down her spine. She knew that medallion. Every detail was etched in her memory. The oval shape, the small marks on the surface, the clasp slightly worn by time. It was identical to the one Gabriella, her missing daughter, was wearing the day she vanished without a trace. Grace felt her breath catch. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her body tensed, and her hands trembled slightly. For a moment she hesitated, but she knew she had to ask. "Excuse me," she called, trying to control the emotion in her voice. The waitress turned to her, giving her a curious look. "Yes, senora. Can I help you with something?" Grace swallowed hard and pointed discreetly at the medallion. "This medallion? Where did you get it?" The young woman reached for the jewel, holding it in an instinctive gesture of protection. Her eyes, once calm, now reflected caution. "It belonged to my biological mother," she answered, her voice sounding careful. "But I never knew her. I was raised in the foster care system." Grace felt her stomach churn. The weight of the waitress's words fell on her like an avalanche. Her chest tightened, and her mind filled with questions. Was it possible? Was this the truth she had been searching for 2 decades? Grace felt her heart hammering in her chest, a mix of anxiety, fear, and hope taking over her. The waitress's words still echoed in her mind. "It was my biological mother's. I was raised in the foster care system." She knew she had to proceed with caution. She didn't want to scare the young woman, but this was no simple coincidence. With trembling hands, she opened her purse and, amidst documents and personal items, found the photo she had treasured for 20 years. It was an old photo, yellowed with age, but the image was clear. Gabriella, still a child, smiling innocently at the camera, and in the center of her chest, reflecting the sunlight, was the same golden medallion the waitress was wearing now. Grace took a deep breath and held out the photo to the young woman. "Please, look at this." The waitress, who had maintained a suspicious posture until then, hesitated for a moment before taking the photo. Her eyes scanned the image, and then her face lost color. The shock was visible. She pressed her lips together, her eyes wide as she stared at the photograph. Her breath became shallow, and her hands began to tremble. "That girl," she murmured, unable to look away. Grace leaned forward a little, feeling the emotion tighten her throat. "That girl is my daughter, Gabriella. She disappeared 20 years ago, the day she wore that locket." The young woman blinked several times, as if trying to process what was happening. Her mind seemed to be spinning in a jumble of memories and doubts. "But that doesn't make sense," she stammered, looking from the locket to the photo and then back to Grace. "Does that mean—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The whirlwind of emotions was too strong. Something inside her screamed that this story was no coincidence. Grace, feeling the weight of the moment, waited in silence, giving the young woman time to absorb the revelation. But deep down, she already knew the answer. She was standing before Gabriella, and Gabriella was faced with a past she never imagined would resurface. Angela felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her heart raced, and a wave of panic took hold of her. What was that woman saying? How could that photo exist? She looked again at the image in her hands. The girl in the photo was eerily similar to the few fragmented memories she had of her childhood. The locket, the same one that had always been with her, was proof that that story was not a mistake. But accepting that was another thing. Her body reacted before her mind could even process everything. Fear took over. "No, this can't be true," she whispered, feeling her breath grow short. Grace noticed the terror on the young woman's face. She reached out gently, trying to calm her. "Please, Angela, don't be afraid. I just want to understand the truth." But for Angela, this was simply too much. Her whole life, she believed that she had been abandoned, that there was no one for her. Now, an unknown woman appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be her mother. Her body tensed, and her only reaction was to run away. Without saying anything else, she turned abruptly and ran towards the door of the taqueria. "Angela, wait!" Grace called desperately, getting up from the table. But it was useless. The young woman was already crossing the street, disappearing among the hurried pedestrians. Grace stood still, not knowing what to do. Her eyes filled with tears, and a crushing emptiness took over her. She had found a clue, perhaps the greatest of her life, and now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The cruel doubt settled in her mind. Was it really Gabriella? Or was all this just a desperate mistake by a mother who never stopped searching? Grace felt the weight of the moment crushing her chest. Angela's escape had left an even bigger hole inside her. She couldn't just accept it and leave. Not now. Not after having seen with her own eyes that medallion, the photo, the undeniable resemblance between the young woman and the daughter she had lost 20 years ago. Sitting at the table in the taqueria, she stared at her cell phone as if searching for answers. She needed to act. She needed someone who could help her unravel this story. It was then that a name came to her mind: Samuel Marquez. He was one of the most respected detectives in Guadalajara, a meticulous man, known for finding answers where no one else saw possibilities. If there was anyone capable of discovering the truth, it was him. Grace didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and quickly dialed the number she had saved for years, but never thought she would use again. After a few rings, a deep, firm voice answered on the other end of the line. "Marquez." Grace took a deep breath before answering. "Detective Marquez, this is Grace Villaseñor. I need your help. It's about my daughter." There was a brief pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "Ms. Villaseñor, I thought you had given up on this search." "I never gave up," she replied firmly. "And now I've found a clue. A real clue." The detective was silent for a moment, considering her words. Then his voice sounded more interested. "Where can I find her?" Grace looked around the taqueria, as if she could still see Angela fleeing through the door. Then she answered, "I'm in Guadalajara. And this time, I'm not leaving here without answers." Samuel Marquez began the investigation immediately. At first it seemed like a difficult mission, a puzzle with pieces scattered across an entire city. But he knew how to handle it. He had dealt with complex cases before, and Grace's drive, her determination, motivated him to dig deeper. He went to the local adoption system and began to comb through the documents related to Angela. He started with the basic information: her birth name, her adoption history, and then he found something that stopped him in his tracks. Angela's adoption papers were filled out, but there was something odd. Her adoptive mother's signature didn't match previous records, and the official seal appeared to be a forged copy. He also noticed a flaw in the records. The adoption registration number was missing, something that wasn't normal in legal transactions. It was then that doubt became certainty. Angela had not been placed in the foster care system legitimately. Her case had not been properly registered, which meant that someone had probably done it underhandedly. Samuel knew that this type of fraud was not something simple, and that it often involved people with influence or connections. He couldn't help but wonder who else was involved. Who could have hidden Angela's true identity? And what else would Grace need to find out to finally be reunited with her daughter? He decided to proceed more cautiously. He needed more evidence, more documents that could tie everything together into a larger scheme. As the days passed, his investigation led him to a place he hadn't expected, an illegal adoption ring that operated well under the radar. Something big is going on here, Samuel thought as he looked at the papers spread out in front of him. And it goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. He prepared to move forward, knowing that the answer Grace so desperately wanted was closer than ever. But what he didn't know was that as he got closer to the truth, he was also getting closer to a danger that could change everything. Samuel Marquez had already solved part of the mystery. Angela had been placed in the foster care system illegally, without legitimate documents. But the main question still remained to be answered. Who was responsible for this? The investigation led him to old records, interviews with retired orphanage workers, and finally to a name he hadn't expected to find. Lorena Gutierrez. Lorena was no stranger to Samuel. He remembered her from the early days of the investigation into Gabriella's disappearance 20 years ago. At the time, the nanny claimed she knew nothing, that she had been just another victim of the tragedy. But now, the facts told a different story. Samuel called Grace immediately. "Miss Villaseñor, we need to talk. I've discovered something important." When Grace arrived at the detective's office, he greeted her with a serious look. In the center of the table, a file with Lorena's name on it. "I followed Angela's trail through the foster care system. All the paths led me to one name, Lorena Gutierrez." Grace was breathless for a moment. "Lorena? No, that doesn't make sense. She loved Gabriella as if she were her own daughter." Samuel slid the documents toward Grace. "The facts say otherwise. She was the one who gave Angela up to the foster care system. She may have even been paid to do it." Grace felt the ground disappear from under her feet. Lorena's face came to mind. The memories of her holding Gabriella in her arms, singing her to sleep. How could all of that have been a lie? With a shaky voice, Grace murmured, "If Lorena gave up my daughter, then she knows who took her from me." Samuel nodded slowly. "Yes, and it's time for her to answer some questions." Grace felt her heart pounding in her chest as she approached Lorena's small house on the outskirts of Guadalajara. She had spent the night awake, reliving every moment of the past, every memory of her missing daughter. Now, faced with the cruel truth that Samuel had discovered, she could wait no longer. She needed answers. She knocked loudly on the door. For a moment she feared that Lorena would not be there. But then the door slowly opened, revealing a woman with grey hair and an apprehensive look. Lorena blinked a few times, surprised to see Grace at her door after so many years. "Grace, what are you doing here?" Lorena's voice sounded cautious, almost nervous. Grace felt a mixture of anger and pain as she looked at this woman who had once been part of her family. She took a deep breath, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow. "I know everything, Lorena." Her voice came out firm, cutting. "I know you took my daughter. I know you put her in the foster care system. I know you lied to me for 20 years. Lorena's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her face drained of color. "Grace, please, I can explain." "Explain?" Grace let out a bitter laugh. "Then explain to me, Lorena. Tell me how you had the nerve to take my daughter away from me." The silence hung heavy in the air. Lorena lowered her head, Her shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of an unbearable burden. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she confessed, "I had no choice." Grace frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Lorena took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I was paid to do this. They offered me money. More money than I would ever have in my life. I was desperate. But I never wanted to hurt you, Grace. I swear." Grace felt her body shudder, her vision blurred with anger and disappointment. "Are you telling me that you sold my daughter? That you gave Gabriella to an illegal adoption ring for money?" Tears began to stream down Lorena's face. "I was just a pawn in all this. I didn't know what was going to happen to her. I just followed orders." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. For years, Lorena had been like a second mother to Gabriella. And now, finding out that she had betrayed her family in the cruelest way possible was unbearable. "Who paid you?" Grace's voice was a thread of restrained hatred. "Who was behind this?" Lorena hesitated, swallowing hard. "If I tell you, Grace, they might come after me." "Who are they, Lorena? Who bought my daughter?" Lorena closed her eyes for a moment as if she knew that once she said those words, there would be no going back. When she opened them again, her voice was weak but full of fear. "Your husband, Grace. Javier was involved in this." Grace felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Javier's name echoed in her mind like thunder. Her own husband, the man she had shared her life with. Could he be behind Gabriella's disappearance? If it were true, then the story was even worse than she had imagined. Samuel Marquez felt a shiver run down his spine as he searched through the records of the Los Pequeños Angeles orphanage. For days, he had followed up on loose leads, spoken to former employees, and analyzed documents that seemed to have been purposefully erased. But now, the truth was beginning to emerge like a nightmare. Samuel sat in his small office, spreading out several old files on his desk, each full of irregularities. Children would enter the system and mysteriously disappear without a trace. There were no adoption records, no clues as to where they had gone. And Lorena Fernandez's name kept coming up. Samuel picked up the phone and called Grace. "Grace, I need you to come to my office right now. I found something that will change everything." A few minutes later, Grace hurried in, her face drawn with exhaustion and anguish. "What's wrong? What did you find?" Samuel pushed one of the files toward her. The Los Pequeños Angeles orphanage. It wasn't just a shelter for orphaned children. It was part of a much larger scheme. Children would disappear from the system without a trace, and Lorena was directly involved in it. Grace leafed through the documents, her heart pounding. So that's how Gabriella disappeared. They put her in this orphanage and then sold her. Samuel nodded. "It's very likely. But there's one more thing. I found out about a man named Diego Ramirez. He worked at the orphanage for many years and was the one who adopted Angela. From what I've gathered, he was also involved in these illegal adoptions." Grace was silent for a moment, trying to process everything. "Where is he now?" Samuel took a piece of paper and wrote down an address. "He still lives here in Guadalajara. If we want answers about what happened to your daughter, Diego could be the key." Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The truth was getting closer, but her fear was also growing. Who else was involved? Who, besides Lorena and Diego, knew Gabriella's fate? She opened her eyes with determination. "We're going to find this man." Angela felt her heart beat faster as she approached the old Los Pequeños Angeles orphanage. The building, now abandoned, had broken windows and peeling walls, like a grim monument to the cruel past it hid. With each step, vague and distant memories danced in her mind, feelings of fear, loneliness, and an emptiness she could never explain. She had learned the truth about Diego Ramirez that morning. A former employee of the orphanage, he had been involved in the illegal adoption scheme and had always known who she was. For years, he had pretended to be a kind man, someone who cared about her well-being. But now, it all made sense. The affection he showed her? Only guilt. The stories he told her about her unknown birth mother? Lies. Determined to find answers, Angela pushed open the rusty door of the orphanage and went inside. The smell of mold and dust made her cough. Everything was abandoned, as if no one had set foot there for years. The empty shelves, the old toys thrown on the floor, the peeling walls. It was as if time had frozen in this place. She rummaged through drawers and cabinets, her heart racing every time she came across an old document. Then, deep inside a rusty filing cabinet, her eyes settled on something. A folder with her name on it. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside, she found forged documents, an intake record that didn't match her real age, and a file where someone had written, "New arrival, no family history." But the most shocking information was on a smaller piece of paper, yellowed with age. Original name, Gabriela Villaseñor, turned over to the system under unrecorded circumstances. Contact, Lorena Fernandez. Angela felt her legs weaken. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been stolen. Tears burned in her eyes. All the suffering, all the feeling of not belonging, all the unanswered questions, all because someone decided to rip her from the arms of her real mother. Her body shook with anger and pain, but inside her, a flame of determination began to grow. If Diego knew this all along, he would have to answer for his crimes. With the documents tightly clutched in her hands, Angela left the orphanage. The cold night wind hit her face, but for the first time in years, she knew exactly who she was. Now, there was only one thing left to do: confront Diego and get the whole truth out of her. The cold night wind cut her skin as Angela walked quickly through the deserted streets, clutching the documents tightly to her chest. Her heart was still beating wildly from the discovery she had just made. Gabriela Villaseñor. That was the name that had been stolen from her. Now everything made sense, but something was making her uneasy. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling a strange presence. The feeling that someone was watching her made her hair stand on end. Slowly she turned her head back, but saw nothing but shadows cast by the flickering streetlights. "It's just paranoia," she muttered to herself, trying to control her breathing. She took a deep breath and kept walking, trying to convince herself that it was just her mind playing tricks. However, the feeling of being followed persisted. Her steps became more hurried. The sound of another pair of footsteps echoed behind her, keeping pace with her. Angela turned down a side street and entered a small 24-hour market. She tried to hide it, pretending to look at the shelves, while her eyes searched the reflection in the glass door. There he was. A tall man in a dark coat, standing across the street, pretends to be playing with his cell phone. Her stomach turned. Someone knew she had discovered the truth. Trying to remain calm, she picked up a random pack of gum and headed to the cashier. The clerk, a middle-aged woman, looked at her and noticed her nervousness. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked as she scanned her purchase. Angela hesitated for a second. If she said anything, she might put the woman in danger that even she didn't fully understand. She just forced a smile and shook her head. "Yes, I am. Just a little tired." She paid quickly and left. The man was still there, now leaning against a black car a few feet away. When she started walking, he moved too. Her heart raced. She knew she couldn't go back home. If he was after her, he knew where she lived. The only option was to seek help. Samuel. With shaking hands, she picked up her cell phone and called the detective as she quickened her pace. "Samuel, someone is following me. I found out everything at the orphanage, and now I'm sure I'm in danger." "Where are you?" His voice sounded tense and alert. On Calle San Ignacio near the market. Don't go back home. Go to a busy place and wait for me. I'm on my way. Angela hung up and looked over her shoulder. The man was still following her, but now he seemed more determined, closer. She had to act fast. She took a deep breath, gathered all the courage she had left, and started running. The night was heavy in Guadalajara. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting unsettling shadows on the silent streets. Grace was sitting at the desk in the interrogation room of a private police department she had hired to handle the case. In front of her, Lorena was shaking, her hands clasped together, avoiding eye contact. Grace couldn't contain the anger that was boiling inside her. For years, she had lived tormented by the guilt and emptiness of losing her daughter. And now, she discovered that the truth was much closer than she had ever imagined. Tell me, Lorena. Her voice was firm, but filled with pain. What do you know about my daughter's disappearance? Lorena bit her lower lip, hesitating. Her eyes were red from crying, but that didn't move Grace. She wanted answers. Lorena began, but her voice faltered. She took a deep breath and tried again. I was paid to deliver Gabriela. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random kidnapping. Grace felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her body went rigid, her breathing ragged. Who paid you? Her voice was now a deadly whisper. Lorena finally looked up, and the look of pure terror on her face sent a chill down Grace's spine. It was Javier. The name fell like a bomb. The air seemed to disappear from the room. What? Grace blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Your husband, Javier. He was involved in this from the beginning. Grace stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor with a deafening creak. You're lying! She screamed, bile rising in her throat. Javier suffered as much as I did. He would never do that. Lorena lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. He paid me to make Gabriela disappear, Grace, and then he pretended to suffer with her. I regretted it, but it was too late. Grace's heart was beating wildly. Her hands were shaking. Javier, the man she slept with every night, the man who comforted her through the years of despair, was he the one who stole her daughter? Why? Her voice was now a broken whisper. Why would he do that? Lorena swallowed hard, closing her eyes as if to hide from the truth she was about to tell. He had debts, Grace. Lots of debts. Dangerous people were after him, and he sold Gabriela to pay them. Grace felt her legs weaken. A whirlwind of memories flashed through her mind. Javier holding Gabriela as a baby, playing with her in the garden, promising he would always take care of them. It was all a lie. The bitter taste of betrayal rose in her mouth, her hands clenched into fists. He's dead to me, she whispered, her eyes shining with hatred. And I swear, Lorena, I'm going to finish him. The morning in Guadalajara was calm, with the shy sun filtering through the windows of Angela's house. Grace stood there, her heart racing, looking at the young woman she now knew was her daughter. She had spent so many years trying to imagine Gabriela's face, but she had never imagined anything like this. Angela, with her curious eyes and expression full of uncertainty, stood in front of her, a little far away. Grace felt a lump in her throat. She was holding the locket, the same one Angela wore around her neck, but now she knew it had a much greater meaning. It was a bond, a link between her and the daughter she had lost years ago. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Angela said, her voice shaking, avoiding looking at the locket Grace held. Grace, feeling the weight of pain and anticipation, slowly approached. She looked at Angela and said in a firm but softly emotional voice, Angela, you've heard me talk about Gabriela, my daughter. This locket, it's identical to the one she was wearing when she disappeared. I can't deny it anymore, and neither can you. Angela looked at the locket in her hands, and her expression began to change. She swallowed hard, and a shiver ran down her spine. This is impossible, she whispered, touching her own locket, her fingers hesitant as if trying to pull away from the truth. Grace couldn't hold back the tears. Angela, please. Look at this locket and compare. I know the truth is hard to accept, but you have to understand. This is the symbol of my love for Gabriella, and you are her. The young woman was silent for a few seconds, her eyes brimming with tears. Then she took a deep breath, and as if an internal explosion finally said, I remember. I remember when I was little, and I saw something like this. No, I don't want to believe it, but something inside me is telling me it's true. Grace moved even closer, holding the locket tighter. Angela, you are my daughter. I've searched for you for years. I've never stopped looking for you. You were stolen from me, but now, after so long, I've finally found you. The young woman was shocked. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to accept all of this. How can I be Gabriella? How can I have been someone else for so many years? Grace took a step closer, placing her hand on Angela's shoulder. I know it's hard, daughter. I know this truth is cruel, but you are not alone. No matter what happens, I am here, and I will love you as I have always loved you. That will never change. Grace's words, filled with love and pain, seemed to touch something deep inside Angela. She finally let the tears roll freely down her face. I don't know what to call you. Mom? Mom? She stammered, her voice broken by confusion, but also by a timid hope that was beginning to emerge. Grace smiled through her tears. Yes, daughter, I am your mother. I always have been. The moment hung in the air. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was this moment. The truth that had been buried for so many years was now in plain sight, and Grace felt, for the first time, that the void inside her heart was beginning to fill. Angela took a tentative step toward Grace, and with a gentle gesture, she hugged her. It was as if the pieces of the past, the pain, the uncertainty, and the loss were finally coming together. There was no more doubt. There was no more mystery. And now, what do we do? Angela asked, her voice soft but filled with a new kind of determination. Grace looked at her, holding her hands. Now, daughter, we rebuild. Let's go together. Let's start over. And there, amid the pain of the past and the weight of the truth, Grace and Angela took the first step toward a future together. Night fell on Guadalajara with a heavy, almost unreal silence, as if the world around Angela was waiting for the moment when she would make the decision that would alter her life forever. The sky was overcast, and the stars were barely visible, as if they reflected the darkness that now filled her mind. She sat alone on the couch in the living room, her eyes fixed on the locket Grace had given her. The weight of the truth still seemed to crush her. Angela couldn't believe it. How could she have been stolen from her mother? And even more shocking, how could Diego, the man who had cared for her, who had called her his daughter for so many years, have been involved in this? The thought consumed her, and anger and pain mixed in her heart. The man she had trusted, the one who had given her shelter and affection, was nothing more than a fraud, part of a web of lies. I can't live with this, Angela whispered to herself, the tone of desperation in her voice. I need to know the truth. I need to face Diego. She got up from the couch with unshakable determination. It was time to stop running. Even though fear consumed her, she could no longer live in the shadows, not knowing what had happened, not knowing why her life had been taken in such a cruel and merciless way. The road to the orphanage was a tortuous journey. Angela drove slowly, but each kilometer seemed like an eternity. Tension was in the air, and she knew that the encounter with Diego would be painful. The man she had known as a protector, someone who had helped her during her childhood, was now a stranger. How could she look into the eyes of someone who had lied to her, who had been an accomplice to something so horrible? Arriving at the old orphanage, Angela parked the car and stood for a moment just looking at the building, now empty and dark at night. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She was there with a single goal, to find out the truth, at any cost. Diego was inside, sitting in a chair in the office room, staring thoughtfully at a random point. When he heard the door open, he looked up, and his eyes narrowed as he saw Angela. Angela. He said her name with a softness that seemed familiar, but now to her, it sounded like a lie. "You knew, didn't you?" Angela asked, her voice firm but with a tremor of anger. "You knew who I am. You knew everything. How could you? How could you deceive me all these years?" Diego stood up slowly and took a step forward, but Angela stopped him with a gesture. "Don't come any closer. I want to hear you explain, without lies." He sighed, and for a moment he looked vulnerable, almost defeated. "Angela, I didn't want you to find out. When I found you, you were just a lost child, and I thought I could protect you. I gave you a new life, a better life. You didn't need to know." "I did, Diego," Angela screamed, the anger now evident in her voice. "I'm not a liar. You took me away from my mother, from my family, and you made me believe in a life that wasn't mine. You're an accomplice to all of this." He pulled away, his gaze filled with guilt. I know. But I didn't know how to go back. You don't understand, Angela. There were very dangerous people involved. I couldn't do anything. I was scared. I had to do this to protect myself." "Protect from who?" Angela asked, her voice breaking. "You destroyed me, Diego. You destroyed me." He fell silent, the weight of the words hanging between them. Angela felt the heat of indignation rise through her body. She wanted to understand. She wanted to know what had happened. She wanted Diego, the man she knew as a father figure, to finally look at her and tell her the truth. "Who were these people? Why did you do this?" Angela demanded. I can't tell you everything, Angela," Diego replied, his eyes downcast. "But I can guarantee one thing. I never meant to hurt you. I regret it every day. I did it to save you, but in the end, I was the one who hurt you." Angela looked at him, speechless, and in her heart, a deep pain formed. Everything she knew, everything she believed to be real, now seemed like a sham. Diego was no longer the person she thought he was. "I can't trust you anymore," she said, her voice thick with sadness. "And I won't stop until I know the whole truth. I will fight for my mother. I will fight for my family." With those words, Angela turned and left the room, leaving Diego alone. She knew her journey was far from over, but now more than ever, she was determined to seek the truth, to seek justice for everything that had been stolen from her. The silence of the orphanage enveloped her as she drove back, feeling the weight of her decision. There was no turning back. She had a mission, and nothing could stop her from reaching the end of this story, no matter how painful it was. Angela walked slowly down the dark hallway of the orphanage. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of the truth, now that it was beginning to emerge, was becoming unbearable. She knew that the conversation with Diego would not be easy, but she could no longer run away from the truth. Her feelings were confused, a mixture of anger, pain, and at the same time, an unrelenting desire to understand what really happened. The building was cold and gloomy, and when Angela entered the room where Diego was waiting for her, the man seemed even older and more worn than she remembered him. His eyes, once full of firmness, were now dull, as if guilt had consumed him completely. "You knew, didn't you?" Angela asked, her voice firm, but with a touch of desperation. She was struggling to maintain control, but she didn't know how long she could. You knew from the beginning who I am and what you did to me. Diego watched her in silence for a moment and then sighed, a heavy sound, almost like surrender. He looked down at his hands, as if he didn't know how to begin to explain what he had done. Angela, he began, his voice shaking. I didn't want you to find out. I knew it would hurt you, but I was trapped. I did things I can no longer justify. Angela moved closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to know the truth. She wanted to hear from his mouth what really happened. You gave me away, Diego. You gave me away to the system. You threw me into the abyss. How could you do this to me? I trusted you. Diego looked up. His eyes, which had once been filled with compassion, were now empty, with a deep sadness. I never meant to hurt you, Angela. I was just trying to survive. I worked for an illegal adoption ring. I didn't know how to get out of it anymore. When you showed up at the orphanage, I saw an opportunity to get rid of a mistake. I handed you over to the system, but I didn't want you to suffer. I didn't know what would happen next. An illegal adoption ring, Angela murmured, the words coming out like an empty echo. You knew what you were doing, Diego. You knew you were handing me over to people who didn't even see me as a child, but as a commodity. He closed his eyes, as if trying to find some peace in the words he had just said. I did all of this because I was trapped in debt, Angela. I was being threatened, and I was afraid that if I didn't follow their orders, something worse would happen. I thought I was doing what I had to do to protect you, even though deep down I knew I was betraying you. You thought you were protecting me? Angela asked, her voice breaking. She took a step back, feeling the pain of the weight of his words. You sold me out. You ripped me away from my family, from my mother. I can't trust you anymore, Diego. I don't know if I'll ever understand why you did this. He stepped closer, tears visible in his eyes. I loved you like a daughter, Angela. I never wanted you to suffer. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I beg you, please understand, I was forced to do it. I was trying to save my own life, and somehow I thought I was protecting you. Angela looked at him, her heart clenching, and though the anger was still there, the pain seemed greater. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to blame him for everything she'd been through, for everything that had been stolen from her. But something inside her still kept her from feeling complete hatred. Maybe it was the need to understand, to finally find answers to the story she'd never known. I don't know if I can forgive you, Diego, she said, the words coming out thickly. But I do know one thing. I need to know what happened next. I need to know who took my life and hid me. Diego swallowed hard, and the silence between them was long, as if he were considering what to say. I don't know who adopted you, Angela. They kept everything a secret. But I can help you. I can try to find something that will lead you to these people. But the truth is, I don't know where you're going, and I'm afraid of what you're going to find out. Angela felt a chill run down her spine. The fear of finding answers that maybe it would be better not to know, but she couldn't go back anymore. The truth, as painful as it was now within her reach. She needed answers. I'm going to find the truth, she said, her voice stronger than before. I won't stop until I know everything, and if I have to, I'll do it alone. She turned her back on Diego, feeling the immensity of the emptiness inside her, but at the same time, a flame of determination began to burn in her chest. No matter how hard it was, she would go after her story, her roots, and nothing could stop her anymore. The door closed behind her, and Diego was left behind, alone, with the ghosts of his own choices weighing on his soul. Angela walked through the streets of Guadalajara. Night was already beginning to fall, but it didn't seem to matter. The weight of the truth still hung over her, but something had changed inside her heart. She now knew who she was. Gabriella. The name she had carried all her life, but which always seemed just out of reach. The truth had become a part of who she was, and more importantly, she finally had an identity. And as painful as it was, she felt for the first time a small glimmer of hope blossoming within her. When she arrived at Grace's house, Angela hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. What would she say? How should she introduce herself to a woman who, despite everything, she now knew was her mother? Grace was waiting at the door, her eyes fixed, as if she knew this moment would finally come. When Angela saw her, they stared at each other in silence. Whatever had been broken between them in the past seemed to have dissipated, leaving only a void that was now about to be filled. Grace was the first to speak, her voice soft but full of emotion. Gabriella, I know you're confused. All of this is very difficult. But you don't have to do this alone. You're not alone anymore. Angela swallowed hard, her throat tight, as Grace's words echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe, but the wounds of the past were so deep. Angela began, but the words stuck. She didn't know how to express all the pain, all the anger, and at the same time, the relief of finally finding a piece of what she had always been missing. I'm not Gabriella, she said finally, her voice shaking. I'm Angela. I've always been Angela, but... She hesitated, taking a deep breath. I finally understand. I understand that the Gabriella you knew is me. Grace stepped forward, her eyes shining with an emotion Angela never imagined she would see in her. Yes, Gabriella, she said, almost in a whisper. Yes, you are my daughter, and I am your mother. No matter what happened, nothing can change that. Angela felt something in her chest break. It was as if all the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. She finally allowed herself to feel what she had never known, belonging. Even with everything she had faced, she now knew that she had a mother who loved her, who wanted her in her life. A mother who, for so many years, had missed her as much as she had missed her. Grace held out her arms, and Angela, hesitant at first, finally gave in to the embrace. The tears began to fall, and she didn't try to stop them. Words weren't necessary. All they needed at that moment was that hug, that feeling of reunion that needed no explanation. I never knew what happened to you, Gabriella, Grace whispered. I looked for you in every corner, in every place. And now, you're here. I don't know how to thank you. Angela closed her eyes, feeling Grace's warmth enveloping her. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy, that the wounds of the past might never completely disappear. But there was something there, something new. She wasn't lost anymore. She had a mother. She had an identity. I don't know how to thank you, Angela replied, her voice breaking. For all this time I felt alone, not knowing who I am. But now I know. I know I'm your daughter, and as hard as it is, I want to try to be the daughter you always dreamed of. Grace smiled, a tear running down her face. You're already my daughter, Gabriella. You always have been. And now, we're going to rebuild our story together. The night, which had previously seemed dark and cold, now seemed warmer. The stars in the sky seemed to shine brighter, as if the entire universe were conspiring to reunite mother and daughter, to give them the chance to live the truth that had been lost for so long. And Angela, or rather Gabriella, finally felt that she had a home. Did this story move you? Then like this video, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing so, you will not miss any story that I post here.